Rusto, from the very beginning, has fought with reckless abandon. Warwick has backed up, but he's been... Oh! Right hand! Rusto's in trouble! As mouthpiece is gone! A left hook! Oh, Rusto is in trouble! He's hanging on for dear life! His mouthpiece is gone! Can Warwick finish him? This is great! Left hook! And now Rusto comes back! Warwick goes back to the ropes! What a comeback! Warwick is in trouble! That's on the feet! What a fight! Jeffrey Rusto really gave their hearts and souls in New York City!
The South Bronx in the 70s and 80s was plagued by violence, street gangs, you know, that was the real deal. And then in the 80s and then the 90s, it was extremely plagued by drugs.
The Royal Javelins, the Ghetto Brothers, the Savage Skulls, the Savage Nomads, you know, either you fight and fight like hell, or you're gonna get your butt kicked daily. How it got really going, there were two gang members on the corner of Stebbins Avenue and Chisholm Street. I got out the radio car and sat on the hood, and the guy says, "Oh, the pigs are here, they're gonna stop the fight." And I said, "Neither one of you punks can fight. I'll fight you." He didn't believe me. I said, "Let me go get my gloves." I went and got the gloves. I jabbed him 3 times. And he said, "How in the H did you do that?" He said, "Would you teach me?" I said, "Oh, so you can become a gang bully?" And he said, "No, if you teach me how to fight, I'm out of the gangs. I'll prefer boxing." That area of the South Bronx, the Hunts Point section and down, the radio never stayed silent. You were through with 8 hours and it felt like you only worked 2.
The thing is, and a lot of people resent it because it's like the Indians attacking the fort. But that's the reason why that they called it Fort Apache, was because of the protection that you had to do. You used to have guys with shotguns out in front of the door.
Crime was extremely high in that time period in the 70s within the confines of 4-1. The quality of life for the residents was low, and the quality of life probably for a lot of police officers at that time too, going from unbelievably violent jobs, heartbreaking instances, back to back to back to back throughout their tours.
There were a lot of people that lived in the Bronx at that time that witnessed their children not having access to recreation, not having affordable housing, not having jobs. You saw a lot of fractured relationships with local NYPD at the time. You saw police violence. You just didn't see police officers that looked like the community.
Police and community relations were at high tensions. Crime was pretty high. So you had something like Fort Apache that really just combated against that.
I went by and saw Fort Apache. Well, it wasn't Fort Apache then. And I went in and I looked at it and I found out who the owners were and what they wanted for it. And that's where Fort Apache started. I spent 2 years vacation in there, It was really tough because it cleaned out my savings. I said, the kids need someplace to go. Because if you went to Madison Square Boys Club or PAL down on 156th Street, the area between those 2 spots were no man's land.
The Bruckner Expressway cut our neighborhood just like most highways and expressways do in our community. And we knew we couldn't cross that side of the highway, right? We knew we couldn't go to that store on that side of the street. We knew we couldn't go to those parks on that side of the highway. But the Boys and Girls Club that we went to was funny because although it was on my side of the highway, we would have people from the opposite end of the Bruckner Expressway come into that community center. And it was an understanding that this was just that space, that neutral space where whatever you carried out there in the streets, whatever beef you had, whatever unwritten street rules you had, it wasn't allowed there. That only happened when you go back on your own block. But in this space, we were all gonna have a good time. We were all gonna enjoy the same shared space because it was all we had.
Once we got it open, now there's no borders. You can come from that area, it doesn't matter. If you come here, you're welcome, but if you come in with gang colors or something on, you're gonna have to deal with me. It was hard, but it was something you didn't want to give up on. It was rewarding to see a kid, you know, start respecting you that he see in the street.
What made Fort Apache unique is that we grew. You know, we started mom and pop like most others, and the longevity of it. You know, we did like 30 years. You got amateurs coming in to box, and that was very successful for us, raising funds.
If you got skills, you go to Fort Apache. You can't say you was a good boxer unless you go to Fort Apache.
You have to be serious about boxing to train at Fort Apache. The trainers ain't play, the fighters ain't play. You couldn't half-step going into Fort Apache. That was one gym that you had to really know what you was doing, really love the sport in order to train in that gym. And that's what that gym was about. It was encouraging you to do things that you didn't really think you can do. It was just like a neighborhood that you had to be tough and you had to be mentally tough in order to make it, in that gym and out that gym.
Back then it was kind of falling to pieces, it was cold, it was freezing in that gym. But people didn't care about that. The energy was like, you have to work to stay warm.
You thought you was gonna freeze, you know? You thought you was just gonna come out, man, I ain't gonna make it through this. A lot of guys wouldn't come to the gym.
It was like a rugged gym, so it was like in a Rocky movie. Yeah. It was all sweaty. It was funny because when it rained in the ring. Yeah. So you had to, you know, and it had maneuver yourself around it.
Smell. It's hard to describe, but this to me that was the smell of a gym.
Fort Apache was my foundation to being what I am now. The place where I became a great fighter. I was in the streets, you know. I was doing drugs, and I started boxing to change my life around, and just wanted to fulfill my goal, you know, being somebody, you know, proving something to myself after I came out the drug program. I found out that Fort Apache has good fighters. So when I went there, they had good fighters. They were all good, Golden Gloves champs, national champs, I mean, knockout artists, I mean, you name it, that gym had it. And I was getting beat up every day. It's made me step up my game. It made me want to get payback from getting beat up, made me work harder. You know, it made me hungry. It made me know that, okay, this is really boxing. I was training there. I seen former world champ Aaron Davis spar with these kids. These guys are amateurs, and I see them get beat up. A world champ get beat up by amateur fighters. That's how intense it was. People go there to get tested.
You say you see me get beat up by a Well, I'm not even gonna get into that. I used to clean out George's gym. I used to beat everybody up in there. When I go there, I couldn't even get no work. Like, I might have had an off day, and somebody might have got the best of me. But getting beat up, I have never in my life got beat up. But I think I know the sparring that he's talking about. I don't want to say the guy's name because he didn't say nothing bad about me. But the guy kind of got the best of me one day. Then the next time I came back, George stopped it. George says, no, I had to stop it, man. You was gonna kill that guy, man. I ain't gonna let him get hurt. George was tough, he was a man. He treated you like a man. He had the way of bringing that fight out of you. George was a big guy, he said what he meant, and he would come at you like, you know, this is what you're gonna do.
As soon as a kid used to be acting or running around in Fort Apache, George used to straighten them out. Like, George used to talk to them.
It was like a safe haven, you know, Big George. He kept a lot of guys off the streets.
I was brought there by a friend named Don Smith. He says, now when you meet Big George Hankins, it's not no everyday coach. He says, this guy's gonna want results and he's gonna want results in a due time. He says, and George don't take no crap, no crap. Then when I heard how he was talking, I said, yeah, this guy don't take no crap. I gotta do everything right here. He says, Doughboy, what's your weight? I said, I'm a pound off. He said, you ain't doing your job, Doughboy. So, man, all those years to have the discipline and be able to do what you're supposed to do, not only in boxing, but that is carry out with me to life.
I wanted something different. I wanted to be a world champion, like how all these guys, I see them fighting in the Garden, the Barclays Center. It's like, oh, I want to fight there. As soon as I turned 17, I went for my first gloves and I was able to fight in the Madison Square Garden. It was early 2000s, so it wasn't really a big women's boxing foundation. So at that time, it was still hard for me to get fights, get sparring. So like I said, I usually sparred with other men, and it was like a sense of community. You know, a lot of guys, when I first started, would put me down, or she shouldn't be in the gym, or it's a distraction, all these nonsense that you hear. And at the time, I'm 12, 13 years old coming into a gym full of men. So it was, you know, you got half of them that were negative, and the other half is like, you know what, do it. You know, these men that had sisters, mothers, you know, wives. So they took positivity in me. They always drove me to do better. And it was a little hard because, you know, thinking about 13 years old, sparring with a man, you know, I know I'm strong, but I'm not that strong. But it built a lot of character for me, because once I started competing at 16, my first Golden Gloves, I was fighting against veterans and I was getting first round stoppages. It's the whole environment. When you see people there and sparring and beating the crap out of each other, and then just like, all right, have a good day. Like, they don't want you just to succeed in boxing, but outside of life. So they make sure that you stay on the game, which is hard for, you know, the youth. And for coming into environments like the South Bronx, you get caught up. So they make sure you stay on the right track. With all the accomplishments that I made, it was because of gyms like Fort Apache. Having that environment with Fort Apache and Big George telling me, you can do that. It builds character, it builds self-respect for yourself, for your family, for your community. Boxing kept me on point. Like I would never take away anything from the South Bronx, but I know I want more from what I've been exposed to. And boxing has pretty much done that. I've won scholarships to boxing. And if it wasn't that I was having people talk to me and put me on track, I would have never thought about going back to school. I went back to college. I got my GED. I've been traveling since. I qualified for the Olympics.
Well, I was in the boys club one night, and I was teaching a class, and there was a young lady came in and told me, says, there's a guy outside trying to sell some reefer. And then I put on my I'm a psycho, what? And I go outside and I see this little guy. I asked him, I said, what do you want to be, punk, when you grow up? And he said, I want to be a boxer. And I said, you're right. I said, I tell you what I want to do. I'm going to prove you're wrong. So I said, meet me tomorrow, and I gave him the name of this church on St. Anne's Avenue. I said, meet me tomorrow at 5 o'clock here, and I wrote it down for him. And when I got there, he was there the next day. Kenny was a 3-time Golden Glove champion, and he was a 2-time world champion. The satisfaction I get out of that is to see young people growing up with some kind of faith, some kind of responsibility, some kind of commitment, and especially knowing about family.
I have kids, they're men now, that went from Fort Apache to Wall Street. Guys that, went from Fort Apache to school teaching. So, and all of them, they never forgot their basic steps where they were coming up from. If it wasn't for Fort Apache, or if it wasn't for George Hankins, or if it wasn't for this, I don't think I'd be here. And that really, it brought tears to my eyes.
Fort Apache was one of the places where I made one of my few Golden Glove champions. And to have a Golden Glove champion out of Fort Apache, it was great.
We were a 501c3, and so we don't own the property per se. The board of directors own the property, but we had some problems, and a lot of debt with the demolition, and we couldn't afford it. It was $500,000. So we had no option. We had to sell the property, and we did, and we sold the property. So the people who purchased the property had promised to memorialize that site with a youth center. It's what they're doing is affordable housing. From what I understand, Richard Isquierdo's Garden Apartments, and within that complex, they're gonna make space for a youth center. It's not gonna be named Fort Apache. It's gonna be Fox Street Youth Center, and so it's the same site. So I think it's a very nice gesture for them to do that, honoring what was there and what that meant to the community. So it's going to be a little bit down the road, but I'm excited about it. I hope I'm alive to witness the opening of that. But for the people in the community, I think it's going to be great.
I'm standing on the grounds of where the Fort Apache Youth Center used to stand. On this site, one day soon, will be a new youth center and an 87-unit affordable housing complex that's going to build on the legacy of the Fort Apache Youth Center. What we're going to do is take what is really an unused space and build something that another generation of the community can use. The city demolished the buildings when the youth center closed and fell into disrepair. When I realized what the Fort Apache Youth Center was and meant to the community, and that they still owned the site next door, I realized that there was an opportunity to put together really a monumental project. And I was trying to have the Fort Apache Youth Center sell me the adjacent piece that they still owned. And was having a lot of trouble getting traction with the board members. And I cold called Rafael Salamanca, who's the district council member representing that area.
No idea who he was. He gave me a call, random call. And so we sat down, we spoke, and I trusted him, immediately about, his vision of bringing back affordable housing to that area.
And as soon as I showed him a map and what I was planning to do, he stood up at the conference table and goes, I grew up around the corner. All my friends went there. Whatever you need, we're gonna make it happen.
And I'm extremely invested in this project so that number one, we can build this gym, and number two, find funding so that we can create programs for the youth in the South Bronx.
Through some relationships, I came across Jonathan Butler of Radson Development, who was the right partner to rebuild a new youth center on the site, as well as an affordable housing project.
To bring back a youth center like the Fort Apache Youth Center really means a lot to the community members, the local stakeholders, and will ultimately make this project be successful in terms of activating youth services in an area where they're most needed.
The Fort Apache Youth Center in the 1970s was one of the first iterations of something where we're actually actively engaging the youth of our community as a part of our policing strategy.
It showed that they cared. There is a way for communities and PD, NYPD to work together. We can't lose that. What happened back in the 80s, what was built, is something that needs to continue to live on. And now, unfortunately, my community is suffering from gun violence. I have adolescents, 14 and 15-year-olds who are committing these gun violences. And we have to find creative ways to keep them occupied. And this is a creative way to keep them occupied, bringing back this youth center.
The 4-1 Precinct has a need and would love as many community centers as possible, and the Fort Apache Youth Center is just another great example of an opportunity that we're gonna have to make referrals for our kids, to change the way their trajectory in life could possibly go, and to give them an opportunity to learn something new, meet new friends, and have a positive interaction with the police.
And if we can use the Fort Apache Community Center as a way to reimagine and rethink how we engage youth and law enforcement and bringing everyone together, then we should use this center as a catalyst for change.
That's the key to a successful project. When you have a council member and community board that's that emphatic, that's excited about a project, it's a win-win. I think it's something that we could ultimately be proud of. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you want to be proud of what you do, and we're proud to bring back the Fort Apache Youth Center.
And the youth center would be like a second home. you know, that people can look forward to going to and be happy being there, you know, because that's what it did for me. I was always loved to, right after I finished going to school or whatever I finished doing, running to the community center. It was just my passion. Like, it's something that you love, you know, to do. And that's what it would do for the kids. It would make them feel like they have another home to go to, and that's important.
They could go to the gym, they'll have something to do, they could go to the gym and train and learn boxing. You'll make it, you know what I'm saying? You'll see where you want to go or what you want to do instead of just hanging on the corner or running around the blocks and stuff. It was rough coming through those days. You know, I'm fortunate enough, and I thank God that I'm fortunate enough to be alive and looking back, and I never forget those days. So that's the strength that keep me going on. I'm at my place now, and I'm saying I've done a great thing in boxing, but you know, at a time that I was boxing, I was a kid. You know, you didn't know much about managing money and doing this. You just spend, do this, do that. And now, you know, when you do things, you say to yourself, wow, if I could have a chance to do it now, I know what to do.
You see, when you have programs like that, I believe they need to have the cops come around every now and then, come to the gyms, talk to the kids, you know, so the kids can see their face, they can see the kid faces, and they can communicate better.
We engage the youth not because it helps us just fight crime, but it's the right thing to do. It provides the opportunity to improve the perception of police and police to really understand the community too.